You're watching Hi-Fi Lo-Fi. I recently made a video about the Technics deck. You can see on the top there the RS-M22G. Look back at that if you want to see more details. The deck below, the Victor KD-31, I made a video about that in January last year, and sorry to say, it's absolutely atrocious. I've still left it up for your information, but I wouldn't recommend watching it. It's really bad. I've decided to revisit that deck simply to compare it with the recent acquisition of the Technics deck. So what I'm going to do today is just look at how they differ. They're both from the same era, which is probably apparent from their appearance. They are both from the 1970s. The Victor deck is from 1974 and the Technics deck is from 1979. The Audio Heritage website gives the year of the Victor deck as 1976. My initial research showed it was 1974. If you have any other info on that, please let me know in the comments below. Both these screenshots are from the Audio Heritage website. I thoroughly recommend it, and I shall be posting links below in the description. They are both very typical of cassette decks from this era, and they share many common features and functions, not just between them, but compared to other cassette decks. There are other cassette decks from all the major manufacturers that are indeed very similar. First off, the buttons here, there are 7 buttons now. I'm not talking about the timer button. This is an extra button here for the timer. I'm not talking about that. But these 7 buttons for the transport control, there are 6 here by contrast. The reason is because the Victor deck, the stop and the eject button are the same, so there's no additional button for eject. This one has an additional button for eject. Both decks boast full auto stop, which wasn't a given back in the day, and for many years many decks didn't have that feature. What that means is that whether or not you're on playback, fast forward or rewind or record, the mechanism, the transport mechanism, will fully stop automatically when the tape reaches the end. The tape counter on both of these is very typical again from this era. For many years, many tape decks had an identical looking 3-digit analog rotating counter. Both of these have record level knobs that control left and right separately. In both cases, the inner knob, which protrudes more but is narrower in diameter, is the left channel, and the outer knob, which protrudes less and is wider, in both cases that's the right channel. So that's obviously a feature that looks standardized. Let me know if yours is different, but it does tell you there on this little diagram on each one. Another point to note is they both have VU meters. This has the most desirable bouncing needle type analog VU meters. This has fluorescent VU meters, and it's not necessarily an age thing because at different times different manufacturers used different types of VU meters. Just a point to note for your information, VU meters were first used in the 30s. In the 1930s they were developed for professional use, for radio broadcasting, and the very first VU meters were neon lights stacked vertically. Switch on the unit, turn the lights off. How about that? Absolutely beautiful, really love that. Switch it on, and this time I'll press play so you get a better idea. and I'll switch off the light. Well, I'm okay with that. I think it looks nice. It's a totally different experience to the bouncing needles on the Victor deck, but I think that pure white fluorescent display is certainly preferable to some of the later multicolour displays and the dot matrix and things like that. I have to say I really like the clarity and simplicity of it. Something else that is apparent from the VU meters is the peak level for recording, and obviously playback's affected by that as well, but the peak level on the Technics deck from 1979 is 8 decibels, and the peak level on the analog VU meters on the Victor deck from 1974, the peak level is 5 decibels. Rather interestingly, it does have another meter which is above it, and it's got these red LED lights which show up to 6 decibels. According to the Audio Heritage website, the addition of that rather unsightly red LED meter was because it had a faster response time and greater accuracy than those beautiful analog VU meters. This deck handles metal cassette tapes, that's type 4, therefore it has a higher peak level because type 4 metal cassette tapes are recorded at a higher level usually to get a better result. Of course, you really don't need to use Dolby while using type 4 tape. Note the Dolby logo there on the level meter, which means you should not exceed that recording level while using Dolby. This one doesn't have any such thing. Of course, it doesn't have Dolby, it has this ANRS, but there's no indication there as to where the level should go up to if you're recording with noise reduction. So the tape type selection here, the Technics deck uses toggle lever switches and spring-loaded push buttons on the Victor deck. There's a big difference between the two decks in that the Technics can handle type 4, but the Victor cannot. So there's something that is common from this era, and that is they both handle type 3 cassette tapes, ferrochrome cassette tapes. And both of these have microphone inputs, and not just one, but left and right, so you can have stereo mics, you can have left and right channel microphones. So we've got different key types. These generally, I believe, are referred to as piano keys. However, how would you describe this type of button? Because I have no idea. Let me know in the comments. Not sure if it was available yet at these in the 70s, but it certainly was very unusual for decks like these to have solenoid controls. They were physical controls, so when you pressed it there was a physical mechanism that would open and control the transport. They've both got a headphone socket, and they've both got headphone sockets without adjustable headphone volume. And I mentioned this before in the last video that it was it was preset by the designers, the engineers, at I suppose what they thought was an optimum level of volume for your headphones. Point to note that this one clearly says Dolby, so this uses Dolby noise reduction. Where the Dolby type is not specified, it nearly always is type B. And this one doesn't have Dolby, you may have noticed. Well, what it does have is something called ANRS. ANRS is JVC's original noise reduction system. apparently it's analogous to Dolby B. That's what I've read, that's what I understand. Now, I looked up and tried to find out what ANRS stands for, and I couldn't find what that stands for. So if you know what ANRS stands for, now I'm going to assume that the NRS is noise reduction system, and I'm going to hazard a guess and say the A is for audio. So I'm going to guess that's audio noise reduction system. Something also interesting about this is the position of the loading bay for the cassette. So as you can see, the Technics one's on the left side and the Victor one is on the right side. Not sure really which is better in terms of like right-handed or left-handed maybe. I don't think it makes any difference whatsoever which side it's on, but I know that some people prefer it on one side. Of course, some decks have it in the middle, don't they? Not sure there. Let me know what you think. Something that is obvious is the different dimensions. So let's have a quick measure. The Victor is 39 centimeters across and the Technics is 43 centimeters across. As you can see, there is a very slight difference in height. The fascia is actually 14 centimeters, but taking into account the feet, it stands about 148 millimeters or something. The Technics stands 140 millimeters with the feet, and the fascia is about 132 millimeters. So the Technics deck is clearly smaller than the Victor deck, and where it is most apparent is in its depth as it sits on the shelf. There's a significant difference in depth there. So the Technics deck is just under 23 centimeters. The Victor deck is just under 30 centimeters. So it's got about a 7 centimeter difference in its depth as it sits on the shelf. But you can probably see a slight difference in color, and certainly the Victor is a more silver, it's a much brighter, a more brilliant silver. The Technics is, and you wouldn't notice this unless they were side by side, the Technics is ever so slightly, dare I say, yellow. It's got a very slight yellow or gold hue to it. Now, without the Victor next to it, I hadn't noticed it until I put them together. So that's an interesting one. Also worth noting, and I think this is possibly just showing its age, is the slight discolorations of the fascia on the Technics. In fact, the overall condition of the Technics is lesser than the Victor. That's again, not sure whether that is due to a quality issue or simply it's had a harder life. Really impossible to tell. Here we have the rear views. Lovely. One first point to note is that the covers are both metal, but the rear panel on the Victor is metal, but the Technics rear panel is plastic. Also, obviously you can see that there are vent holes. This will be for heat dissipation on the Technics. Does that mean it runs hotter? They both have analog RCA inputs and outputs, and there's an additional DIN socket on there. That's an interesting one. Now, years ago, DIN sockets were very normal. Also worth noting is that the interface connections on the Technics have Japanese only labels. But the Victor model has it in English. which is rather interesting because both are Japanese domestic models. So don't be fooled by seeing English on audio gear from Japan, because it doesn't mean it was for export. There are plenty of Japanese domestic models that have English only on them. I strongly suspect that this, which I can feel you can't see it in the video maybe, but it's slightly indented, and this is a label, this is a stick-on label. So it's highly likely that at some point during the production process towards the end, a label would have been applied here with the relevant language for the relevant export market. There is another label on each deck, which is pretty standard stuff, and the Japanese writing on those labels gives the company names in Japanese. What about the inner workings? I'm not taking the covers off, but there are the heads of the Victor, and on the left is the erase head, and on the right is the play record head, which is perm alloy, supposedly better than a bog standard head. As for the Technics deck, again the head on the left is the erase head, and on the right is the play record head. So both of these are two head models, and the play record head is something called SX Sendust, which is supposedly better than perm alloy. Here are some basic technical specifications for when these decks were new, and these figures are for their respective noise reduction systems switched off. I think I've covered everything in that video, but if I missed anything, please ask me in the comments below. I didn't go into recording and playback today, it was just more superficial about the various aesthetics, functions, features, things like that. And rather annoyingly, while making the video, the Victor deck developed a fault, which I strongly suspect is a belt issue, and that will make for a future video when I take the cover off and replace the belt. So watch out for that one coming soon. This has been Hi-Fi Lo-Fi. Thanks for watching.